The countdown has already begun. In just 3 days, the hero will arrive, and with that arrival comes the inevitable end of everything Caroline once believed in. The fragile thread connecting the two of them is about to snap. With a heavy yet determined heart, Caroline prepares herself to say goodbye. In a soft, almost trembling voice, she thanks Lucien and quietly reveals her decision to wait for the hero and then finally break off their engagement once and for all. But who could have predicted what would happen next? The ever-silent Lucien, who had shown nothing but indifference, suddenly reveals regret. His gaze locks onto Caroline, and in a voice filled with unexpected emotion, he confesses that he doesn't want to end the engagement at all. In front of everyone, he declares his love, refusing to give her up to anyone else. The irony is almost suffocating. Just a few months ago, he was the very person desperate to walk away, so why has everything changed now? How did it all come to this? To understand, we must return to 3 months ago, to that fateful rainy night where all the secrets began. Late at night, in a room chilled with tension, Caroline clung desperately to Lucien, refusing to let him go. Her voice trembled with pleading, her dignity long forgotten. Yet Lucien remained cold, determined to draw a clear line between them. He asked her not to make things difficult for him anymore. Her desperate attempt to hold on was met with nothing but silence. Without another word, Lucien turned his back and disappeared into the shadows. "I'm sorry." With those words, their relationship was pronounced dead. Caroline couldn't understand it. They had always gotten along so well. They were engaged, bound by promises since childhood. Why did it suddenly have to end? No matter how many questions she asked, Lucien remained unmoved, like an iceberg that could never melt. Deep down, Caroline already knew the truth. His heart had been stolen by someone else. The appearance of that woman had thrown everything into chaos. But Caroline refused to let go. She rejected the idea of breaking off the engagement with all her strength. To her, this bond was more than just a piece of paper. It was her entire world. They had been engaged since they were 8 years old. Back then, Lucien was a noble boy who drew everyone's attention, and Caroline had fallen in love with him at first sight. She loved following him around, sharing stories, talking endlessly despite her shyness. For 8 long years, she gave him her whole heart. Lucien, in those days, was gentle and kind. He praised her often, listened to her thoughts, and filled her world with warmth. Their bond was sweet and unbreakable, or so she believed. Time passed in the blink of an eye, and at 16, they entered the prestigious Royal Academy together. It was a place filled with the kingdom's brightest talents, including royalty and nobles of the highest rank. Yet even among such elites, Lucien stood out, dazzling everyone with his presence. Caroline, however, stayed in the background, quietly watching her brilliant fiancé from afar. She thought their future was certain, until everything shattered. A sudden disaster struck, the appearance of legendary monsters. These creatures were terrifying, unstoppable, and impossible to reason with. The kingdom fell into chaos overnight. Just when despair consumed everyone, Crown Prince Siegfried stepped forward, leading an army to fight back. Lucien joined as well, but instead of fighting, he became the prince's strategist. Seeing Caroline's worried expression, Lucien reassured her gently. He told her he would be safe, that he was only using his mind, not risking his life. But how could she not worry? As she tried to speak, Lucien softly called her name and asked her to close her eyes. In that fleeting moment, their distance vanished. He whispered a promise that he would protect the royal capital, the place where she lived. Looking into his determined eyes, Caroline recalled an ancient legend, the part no one talked about. It said that when the kingdom faced destruction, a saint from another world would appear to save it. While others dismissed it as a myth, Caroline believed it deeply. She even prayed for that saint to protect Lucien. 2 months later, the army returned victorious. The city erupted in celebration. But amidst the cheers, Caroline froze. Lucien had returned safely, but beside him stood a black-haired girl she had never seen before. Their closeness was undeniable. Could this be the saint she had prayed for? Watching them together, Caroline felt nothing but bitter irony. She was the one who had prayed every day for his safety, yet now she stood alone. In a hidden corner, her composure shattered. She confronted Lucien, demanding answers. But instead of denying anything, he took all the blame upon himself. His unwavering protection of that girl broke something inside her. Desperate, Caroline questioned everything. What had that woman done to him? Was it a kiss or something even more? In her desperation, she abandoned all pride, clinging to Lucien and proposing a heartbreaking bargain. If he could forget that woman, she was willing to give him everything. But it wasn't enough. Lucien finally spoke the truth. He told her to stop. He admitted that he loved someone else, Ella. With no feelings left for Caroline, he declared their engagement meaningless. Without hesitation, he walked away, leaving her behind. Caroline begged him to stay, but all she heard were fading footsteps and the sound of a closing door. In a nightgown, she ran to the terrace, ignoring the maids, shouting his name over and over. But Lucien never turned back. His eyes were cold, devoid of warmth. That distance crushed her completely. She couldn't understand. Why did everything fall apart like this? This was not the ending she wanted. In fact, this story was once just a game, one Kana had been obsessed with in her previous life. In The Saint and the Knight, the so-called villainess wasn't truly evil, she was the most pitiful victim of all. Especially Caroline, whose love was so pure, yet ended in ruin. Kana had always felt it was unfair, even writing to the developers, begging them to give these characters a second chance. When news of a sequel was released, fans rejoiced. But before Kana could even return home, a sudden accident ended her life. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer herself. Surrounded by frightened maids calling out Caroline, memories flooded her mind. In that moment, Kana realized the truth. She had become Caroline. And this story was far from over. Because in the sequel, Caroline was no longer the hated villainess. Instead, she became the central figure, the one pursued by the male leads. A chance to escape her tragic fate, to be loved, to finally live a gentle life. It sounded like a dream. A world where 4 handsome knights revolve around a saint. A typical romantic fantasy. But this game had a twisted rule. Every one of those knights already had a fiancé. And those fiancés? They were all villainesses, symbols of sin, burdens in the knights' lives. The saint pitted the knights, believing they were trapped in loveless engagements. She swore to show them what true love meant. Kana stood frozen. This wasn't the story she remembered. Because the Lucien in this game was nothing but a complete scumbag. He publicly and almost proudly announced that he had finally found his true love, Saint Ella, completely abandoning the fiancé who had devoted her entire life to him. For Caroline, this wasn't just heartbreak, it was a complete and devastating collapse of her world. But before Kana could even finish venting about this absurd and bloody storyline, everything spun violently. In the blink of an eye, she was dragged straight into the game world itself. Just like that, she fell into a deep sleep for 3 whole days. When she finally opened her eyes again, her mind was overflowing with chaotic and fragmented memories. The ending that everyone had once celebrated had already played out. The story should have ended there. But for her, this was only the beginning of a nightmare. Because she had crossed into this world and become that unlucky fiancé, Caroline. Lucien had already cast her aside for his so-called true love, and now the two of them were immersed in their happiness. Meanwhile, she, the so-called vicious female supporting character, had become the laughingstock of the entire city. However, something even stranger began to surface. Wasn't this game supposed to be called For Knights? Then why, no matter how she counted, did it feel like a 5th presence had quietly slipped into the story? Her thoughts became even more tangled. Lying on the bed, Caroline felt as if her brain was overheating, like a CPU on the verge of burning out. Faced with this overwhelming situation, she had no idea where to even begin sorting things out. Before she could gather her thoughts, the door was suddenly pushed open. A maid hurried inside, announcing that the Duke had personally come to visit and wanted to check on her condition. If it were the original Caroline, this would have undoubtedly turned into another dramatic scene. But now she simply replied calmly, asking him to wait in the living room. She would not receive guests in her bedroom. The maid was completely stunned. Was this really still the same willful second lady? Standing in front of the mirror, Caroline quietly examined herself. She had to admit, it was a face as delicate and flawless as a porcelain doll. Yet in the game setting, this beauty represented nothing but lust and scandal. In order to win over Lucien, the original Caroline had tried every possible method, pushing herself to extremes. Within aristocratic society, she had been labeled selfish, obsessive, and unhinged. To everyone else, she was nothing more than a beautiful but empty vase, flaunting her looks without dignity. But Kana knew the truth better than anyone. This reputation was painfully unfair. Caroline was never a villainess. She was simply a girl who had given her whole heart to her first love without holding anything back. Watching her be misunderstood like this was unbearable. How could she be called vicious? She was just a foolish girl who loved too deeply. Now that Kana had become her, she silently made a decision. She would never allow the story to repeat itself. She would not let this cruel script continue to trap Caroline's life any longer. Adjusting her skirt, Caroline slowly walked into the living room. Although she had already decided to draw a clear boundary, facing this man again still made her heart feel uncertain. Lucien stood by the window, just as distant and untouchable as ever, as if the very air around him was frozen. In the original Caroline's memories, that lonely back had once been her entire world. Seeing him appear here, she couldn't help but feel slightly surprised. After all, in the past, she had to resort to tricks like pretending to be sick just to catch a glimpse of him. Anyone would have grown tired of that. This time, she greeted him politely, trying to maintain her composure. But Lucien's next words fell like icy water poured over her head. He stated coldly that he was only here out of obligation. Once he confirmed she was fine, he would leave. This distant and rejecting attitude wasn't without reason. After all, the original Caroline truly had gone too far 2 years ago. When the knights returned victorious, rumors spread throughout the academy that the saint would be enrolling as well, and that she would be closely following the crown prince and Lucien. Watching the three of them walk side by side, people couldn't help but call them the saint and her knights. Their harmony was so natural that no outsider could ever fit in. Caroline could only watch from afar as Lucien drifted further and further away from her world. Even the chance to speak with him alone completely disappeared. In those painful memories, every time she saw him, she had to gather all her courage, reminding herself that she was his fiancé, that she needed to act gracefully and properly. Finally, she managed to muster enough courage to invite him to the territory's harvest festival, carefully choosing every word, afraid of making a mistake. But before Lucien could even respond, Ella suddenly appeared. Without hesitation, she naturally wrapped her arm around his, calling his name with bright familiarity. In that instant, all of Caroline's efforts felt like a cruel joke. The identity she had desperately tried to uphold meant absolutely nothing in front of such effortless intimacy. Some positions in life simply cannot be reached through effort alone. Perhaps that was the true beginning of her downfall. Caroline straightened herself and stepped forward as his fiancé, stopping Ella in her tracks. She reminded her that Lucien was currently discussing matters with her, and that such behavior in a place like the Royal Academy was inappropriate. Her words were reasonable, but Ella's reaction completely disarmed her. With teary eyes, Ella claimed she had just arrived and didn't understand the rules. She apologized while explaining pitifully, saying she only wanted to be friends with Caroline. This act of retreat was, in truth, a subtle advance. In an instant, Caroline was painted as the cruel and unreasonable one. As expected, Lucien's attitude softened immediately. The same man who had been cold moments ago now showed concern for Ella, the very person interrupting their conversation. Seeing her pitiful expression, Caroline's anger surged uncontrollably. She mocked her, telling her to leave, even bringing up the crown prince's fiancé to accuse her of lacking manners. The moment those words left her mouth, she regretted them. She knew exactly how she must look now, petty, jealous, and ugly. But that overwhelming jealousy, it was something she couldn't suppress. At that moment, Lucien stepped forward, placing himself protectively in front of Ella. His tone was filled with disappointment as he questioned Caroline. Why couldn't she show even a little kindness? He continued, praising Ella for working tirelessly to save the country, saying that someone like Caroline should understand such hardships better than anyone. Those words cut deeper than any blade. He wasn't just defending another woman, he was standing on moral high ground, completely denying Caroline as a person. After saying those final, crushing words, Lucien left with Ella without a single backward glance. Caroline was left alone, standing in the cold shadows, staring at the retreating figure of the person she loved most, her heart filled with unbearable grief. All she wanted was to go back to the past, to have him look at her the way he once did. She wanted to call out to him, to explain everything, to beg him not to leave, but her throat felt locked, as if something was strangling her voice. Not a single word could escape. That overwhelming sense of helplessness nearly drove her to despair. All she could do was watch as the person she loved drifted further and further away. In this world, Caroline had no freedom at all. Like a puppet bound by invisible chains, she was forced to follow the script, playing the role of a vicious and hateful supporting character. The thought alone was enough to send chills down her spine. Kana, witnessing all these memories, could only feel that this world was utterly insane. It trampled on a person's dignity without mercy. But even so, she couldn't deny one thing: the original Caroline's actions had indeed been extreme. Her hostility toward the saint was too obvious, too uncontrollable. In her desperation to win Lucien back, she had acted recklessly, ruining her own reputation and pushing everyone away. Kana sighed deeply. Even if Caroline deserved sympathy, the mess left behind was already beyond repair. Since Lucien himself had made it clear that he would never love her, there was no point in continuing this painful entanglement. Looking at him calmly, as if discussing something trivial, she finally spoke. Lord Lucien, let's break off the engagement. In that moment, she was no longer the pitiful supporting character begging for love. Caroline chose herself. She thanked him for everything and expressed her intention to go their separate ways. With quiet dignity, she smiled, deciding to put an end to this relationship once and for all. But Lucien didn't take her seriously at all. To him, this was just another one of Caroline's schemes. He even questioned what trick she was planning this time. Caroline froze for a second. It was clearly him who had wanted to break off the engagement first. She was only granting his wish. So why did it suddenly seem like she had ulterior motives? Lucien let out a cold, mocking sneer. I think she is just pretending to be tough now, putting on a calm front. As long as you truly agree to break off the engagement, she will definitely lose control again and create another dramatic scene. Looking at his self-righteous and almost arrogant expression, Caroline was left completely speechless. So in this man's eyes, even when she was finally telling the truth, it was still nothing more than an act? The reason Lucien refused to believe her was painfully simple. The original Caroline had gone too far in the past. Every time they quarreled, she would threaten to break off the engagement, only to break down crying and refuse to let go the moment he agreed. Now, in his mind, she was nothing more than a capricious and unstable lunatic. Realizing this, Caroline finally understood the image she had in his heart. In order to save herself from further humiliation, she quickly emphasized that this time, she was absolutely serious. She had even prepared the official documents. Seeing that Lucien was still doubtful, Caroline decided to act even more generously. She calmly stated that since the engagement was ending, Lucien could now marry his beloved without any hesitation or burden. But the moment those words left her lips, she noticed something change in Lucien's expression. Her heart skipped a beat. She immediately realized that she might have acted too differently from before, too calm, too composed. In order not to raise suspicion, she quickly softened her words, adding that from now on, they would simply go their separate ways, not interfering with each other's new lives. Only then did Lucien finally relax. He said that if Caroline was truly serious, then it would be a relief for him. Although he couldn't understand why she had suddenly changed so much, this outcome was undoubtedly the best possible result. Surprisingly, Caroline didn't feel even the slightest bit of sadness upon hearing this. Instead, her smile grew brighter, almost dazzling. She politely thanked him, then turned around and walked away without the slightest hesitation, leaving Lucien standing there alone. For a brief moment, he even had the strange impulse to stop her, but in the end, he didn't. And Caroline never once looked back. The moment she stepped out of that door, her thoughts were already racing ahead. She needed a plan. Should she head to the library first to search for information? Or should she meet that key person immediately? After thinking it through, she made her decision. That person was far more important. Time was running out. Because in just 3 months, the main storyline of this world would officially begin. Before that moment arrived, she had to secure a way out for herself. In truth, before her reincarnation, Kana had been a passionate and obsessive gamer. Dissatisfied with the tragic endings of the villainous characters in the original game, she had even gone as far as sending countless complaint letters to the developers, demanding a better fate for them. She was, without a doubt, an extreme fan. What she never expected was that 5 years later, the game would actually release a sequel. This time, the protagonist was a male college student whose mission was to save those abandoned fiancés and lead them toward a stunning and satisfying counterattack. This thrilling new storyline had once filled Kana with excitement. But fate had a cruel sense of humor. Just as she was rushing to attend the game's press conference, she was suddenly struck by lightning. And just like that, her life in the modern world came to a tragic and absurd end. When she opened her eyes again, it took her a long time to accept this unbelievable reality. Not only had she crossed into the game world, she had become the very villainous daughter she pitied the most, Caroline. Since there was no way back, she had no choice but to live as Caroline. Fortunately, the sequel storyline would only begin in 3 months. At that time, a new hero would be summoned into this world, and Caroline herself would transform from a hated villainess into a heroine pursued by others. But she had no intention of waiting passively. The sequel introduced many new mechanics and hidden elements that didn't exist in the original game. She needed to prepare in advance. There was a key person she needed to meet immediately. However, just as she was waiting outside, a luxurious royal carriage approached from the distance. The coat of arms engraved on it clearly indicated a powerful and prestigious background. Who could it be, appearing at such a timing? The carriage door slowly opened. And stepping out of it was Ella, the legendary saint herself. Caroline couldn't help but feel a flicker of surprise. Why had this woman come here now? The moment they met, Ella immediately began her performance. She spoke in a soft, pitiful tone, claiming she simply missed Lucien too much and looked as if she feared being blamed. This kind of preemptive tactic had worked countless times against the original Caroline. But not anymore. Caroline had already seen through everything. Instead of getting angry, she responded with elegant composure. She even bowed slightly, openly praising Ella as the kingdom's most precious treasure. This unexpected reaction completely caught Ella off guard. Watching the confusion flicker across her face, Caroline sneered inwardly. Trying to play games with her? It was still far too early. When Ella asked about Lucien's whereabouts, Caroline simply pointed calmly toward the distance, stating that he hadn't gone far yet. But Ella clearly had no intention of leaving things at that. She deliberately asked what the two of them had discussed, her tone carrying a subtle hint of provocation. She even implied that, given their current relationship, meeting privately was inappropriate. Of course, she didn't forget to emphasize how worried Lucien was about her. Looking at the woman in front of her, Caroline felt as though she was watching a perfectly crafted illusion. Exquisite makeup, a carefully styled outfit, it was as if she had stepped straight out of an idol's handbook. That fragile, pitiful aura, combined with subtle displays meant to evoke sympathy, was all designed to awaken a man's protective instincts. It was undeniably effective. But Caroline also remembered something important. This saint, who constantly spoke of others worrying about her, had just married the crown prince 3 days ago. Watching Ella's seemingly troubled expression, Caroline felt nothing but disgust. How long did this woman plan to deceive Lucien? Without hesitation, Caroline reminded her that she was now the crown princess. Running around like this, wasn't she worried about causing concern? To her surprise, Ella showed no guilt whatsoever. Instead, she began to preach confidently about freedom and equality, insisting that marriage should not be a restriction and that men and women deserved equal independence. She carried herself as if she were the only enlightened one in a world of ignorance. Caroline almost laughed. Using equality as an excuse to maintain ambiguous relationships everywhere? In any world, that would simply be called shameless. As Ella prepared to leave as if nothing had happened, Caroline suddenly called out to her coldly. Since things had already come to this, there was no need to maintain any superficial politeness. Word by word, she issued a clear warning. Stay away from Lucien. Even then, Ella continued to play innocent. At that moment, Caroline finally understood this woman was far more calculating than she appeared. Although the original Caroline had been impulsive, she was still just a sheltered, noble lady. Facing someone as manipulative as Ella, it was no surprise she had been completely outplayed, even losing her reputation in the process. Ella continued her act, speaking about her concern for Lucien, even bringing up details from her wedding. She described how uncomfortable Lucien had looked that day. But was that really concern? No. It was nothing more than a deliberate display. A way to flaunt how deeply Lucien still cared for her. She even took on the tone of an elder, advising Caroline to treat her fiancé more gently. That was the final straw. Caroline tore down her facade completely. She declared bluntly that the engagement would soon be cancelled. Hearing this, Ella pretended to be shocked, repeatedly asking why. To Caroline, it was almost laughable. This woman clearly knew everything, yet still insisted on asking. Caroline gave a simple excuse, stating that they were no longer suitable for each other. But Ella refused to let it go, pressing further for a real reason. At that moment, Caroline suddenly understood. Why was Ella so obsessed with this engagement? Because she wanted to hear it directly from Caroline's own mouth. She wanted Caroline to admit that Lucien loved her deeply. That even after marriage, Lucien would still remain devoted to her. This was nothing more than a chance to satisfy her vanity. And Caroline had no intention of giving her that satisfaction. Instead, she revealed her trump card. She calmly stated that she had taken the initiative to break off the engagement because she had fallen in love with someone else. This wasn't entirely a lie. After all, in 3 months, the true hero of the story would arrive. And at that time, she would become the only heroine. Compared to that future, these petty disputes meant nothing. Just as Caroline was lost in her thoughts, the door behind her suddenly opened. And to her surprise, Lucien had appeared. Ella immediately seized the opportunity, deliberately repeating that Caroline had found a new, true love, making sure Lucien heard every word clearly. Only then did Caroline realize. This had been a carefully designed trap from the very beginning. Through leading questions, Ella had forced her to confess. The methods of this so-called saint were truly meticulous. Every single step had been calculated. And yet, Lucien still had the audacity to mock her. He sneered, questioning how someone who had once chased after him so desperately could suddenly change her target so easily. Caroline almost laughed out loud, a bitter, trembling sound caught in her throat, because in the past, Caroline truly could never restrain herself, her emotions always spilling over uncontrollably. But that didn't mean her pain was ever false or exaggerated. Too long, suffocating years she had endured, forced to stand on the sidelines, silently watching those two grow closer, more intimate with each passing day. Who in this world could possibly withstand such slow, piercing torment? Since everything had come to this point, since accounts had to be settled, then let everything be dragged into the light and made painfully clear. Caroline brought up her 18th birthday without hesitation, her voice sharp with memory. He had clearly promised to come and celebrate with her, yet in the end, Lucien didn't just fail to appear, he didn't even bother sending a single message. His excuse had been work, something urgent and unavoidable, but the truth? He had been at the opera house, leisurely watching a performance with that so-called saint. Even the exact location, Caroline had known it all along, every detail etched into her mind like a wound that refused to heal. Now it was Lucien who stood speechless, utterly disarmed, as if he had never imagined that the secrets he believed were so carefully hidden had long since rotted away in the heart of the person he had hurt the most. Caroline didn't stop there. She tore everything open without mercy. In the secluded back garden of the palace, Lucien had embraced the saint, holding her close, whispering words of affection, even admitting that he preferred black hair. Back then, Caroline could only linger in the shadows, unseen and unheard, watching them flaunt their closeness again and again, her heart riddled with invisible wounds. Who could possibly understand that kind of agony? Yet the saint still dared to maintain her gentle facade, pretending to be kind, claiming that such accusations were far too cruel to Lucien. Caroline had no patience left for such hypocrisy. She simply wanted to end it all, to say goodbye and sever everything cleanly. Without a single backward glance, she ordered the carriage to be prepared. If her heart had already been shattered beyond repair, then she would disappear completely from their world, leave behind that suffocating place filled with conflict and humiliation. Ella, meanwhile, went directly to Marquis Aubert's residence, a family far from ordinary nobility. Their lineage ran deep, producing a queen every 3 generations, and now, the future queen of this era stood before her, Isabelle. Not only was she of unmatched status, she had been raised and trained from childhood to wear the crown with grace. When she heard that Caroline had taken the initiative to break off her engagement, Isabelle's eyes filled with admiration, as if witnessing something extraordinary. Yet as their conversation deepened, the poised queen-to-be began to falter, doubt creeping into her voice. She confessed she could not make the prince happy, that perhaps she was utterly inadequate. Caroline quickly cut her off, unwilling to let such thoughts take root. In her heart, only someone like Isabelle was truly worthy of standing beside Siegfried. The memory of the grand ball a year ago surged back, igniting a familiar fury within Caroline. Back then, desperate to catch Lucien's attention, she had dressed flamboyantly, going to great lengths to stand out, only to become the subject of ridicule throughout the entire hall. Nearby, the saint had been performing her delicate act, first claiming thirst, asking for water, then clinging to Lucien again moments later. Lucien, it seemed, adored that kind of soft, fragile gentleness beyond reason. The moment he stepped away, the saint's expression twisted into something cold and mocking. Leaning close to Caroline's ear, she sneered, reminding her that this was already the 5th dance, subtly urging her to be wiser and give Lucien more freedom. Before Caroline could respond, the saint suddenly staged a fall, collapsing dramatically. The moment Lucien heard the commotion, he rushed over, his eyes filled with concern and distress. It was such an obvious, low-level trick, yet at that time, Caroline found herself completely unable to counter it. The saint nestled into Lucien's arms, feigning innocence, even speaking on Caroline's behalf in a hypocritical tone, claiming everything was her own fault and begging Lucien not to blame Caroline. Then she shifted the topic to dancing, humbly admitting her skills were inferior, but insisting she had been practicing tirelessly just to dance with him. From the sidelines, Caroline saw through it all. Every word was a calculated move to shape the narrative, to make it seem as though she was the aggressor. Yet back then, Caroline couldn't control herself. She even offered to find a dance teacher for the saint, only for Lucien to refuse coldly, without a second thought. his tone sharp enough to freeze the air. Caroline had wanted to explain, but the words twisted as they reached her lips. Instead, she awkwardly suggested dancing with Lucien first to prove the saint's lack of skill, but faced with his unwavering protection of the other woman, she froze completely. Why did nothing she did ever matter? Why was she always the one painted as unreasonable? Lucien seemed utterly blind, unable to see the faint, victorious smile at the corner of the saint's lips. Instead, he accused Caroline of causing trouble, telling her to calm down before turning away with the saint in tow. Desperate, Caroline tried to follow, only to slip and fall in the center of the dance floor, humiliation crashing over her as whispers erupted all around. People pointed and murmured, accusing her of deliberately putting on a show to gain sympathy. Lucien didn't even look back, leaving her to drown in their judgment. Just when despair threatened to consume her, a cloak was gently draped over her shoulders. It was Isabelle. This dignified future queen, who was perhaps the greatest victim in this cruel game, had stepped forward. As the fiancé of Crown Prince Siegfried, she had once been capable of managing the kingdom's affairs even during his absence at war. Siegfried himself was not difficult to understand. Beneath his pride, he longed desperately for recognition, and even the slightest praise from Isabelle could bring out a rare, innocent smile. Yet everything had changed after the saint's arrival. Whenever that woman was present, Isabelle seemed silenced by an invisible force, her thoughts trapped, her lips unable to form words. Taking advantage of this, the saint constantly praised Siegfried, elevating him endlessly until he became intoxicated by her words. Misled and furious, he turned on Isabelle, questioning her silence, accusing her of looking down on him. In the end, he personally broke off their engagement, placing the deceitful saint in the position of crown princess. Looking at Isabelle now, Caroline understood everything. This was never a simple matter of love. Some unseen system was targeting them, stripping away their rightful places and handing their fiancés to another. Having uncovered this conspiracy, Caroline refused to remain passive. Grasping Isabelle's hand firmly, she reassured her, promising that she would reclaim everything they had lost. She boldly suggested abandoning those blind men altogether. If they lacked the ability to see their worth, then the women would carve out their own paths. Though Isabelle hesitated, believing her life was already ruined after the broken engagement, Caroline leaned closer, speaking with quiet certainty. In 3 months, a savior would arrive, a hero from another world who would pull them all from the depths. Absurdly, she even proposed that this hero could marry all the abandoned women, forming a hidden harem ending within the game. After all, if survival and happiness could be secured, what did reputation matter? If the system intended to destroy them, then they would overturn the entire game itself. Isabelle laughed for the first time, her spirits lifting as she defended Caroline, calling Lucien foolish for letting such a remarkable woman go. Caroline found herself momentarily speechless. She had meant to comfort Isabelle, yet somehow it was she who felt healed. These so-called discarded women, smeared by the system, were all painfully kind-hearted. Though Isabelle might not fully believe in the future Caroline described, the determination in Caroline's heart only burned brighter. She vowed that within a year, every one of them would live a completely different, brilliant life. With that resolve, her next step was clear. She had to investigate the mysterious hero. Immersing herself in the royal library, she searched through countless ancient volumes, desperate for clues. Yet even as she worked, fragments of her past surfaced relentlessly. Once, despite her bold exterior, she had been quietly devoted, content simply to remain by Lucien's side in silence. But after Ella's arrival, even that small comfort had been taken from her. Watching the tenderness Lucien now showed someone else, she forced herself to snap back to reality, lightly slapping her cheeks to clear her thoughts. This was no time for lingering emotions. There were far more important battles ahead. After combing through every book without success, Caroline could only rely on her memory. The hero would appear in 3 months, not only saving the nation, but also shattering the chains of fate itself. rewriting every cruel ending that had once been set in stone. They will also treat these abandoned, fragile, and utterly heartbroken people, gathering them all gently yet irresistibly into the vast, dazzling harem. But the strange and unsettling thing is, the history books overflow with radiant legends about saints, glowing with reverence and admiration, yet she cannot even glimpse the faintest shadow of that so-called hero. Could it be that such a person might never appear at all? No, she refuses to accept that possibility. She must cling to this final, flickering hope, like a lone candle in the darkness, because if even that is extinguished, then truly, everyone is doomed beyond salvation. She strained her mind, desperately recalling the fragmented images from the game trailer she had once seen in her previous life. All she could grasp was a vague impression that the hero was breathtakingly handsome, almost unreal, like a figure sculpted by fate itself, but the finer details slipped through her fingers like sand. This maddening sensation of holding onto a secret too heavy to bear, yet having no one to share it with, pressed against her chest until it felt suffocating. At first, she had suspected that Isabel might have also traveled through time, carrying memories of the same world, but after careful probing and subtle testing over a long period, it became painfully clear Isabel knew nothing of the game, nothing of the cruel script guiding their lives. It seemed that in this vast, intricate world, Caroline alone was burdened with knowledge of the future's direction. No, that wasn't entirely true. She suddenly remembered there was still that Saint Ella. Ella must know the storyline of the first game, must understand at least part of this twisted narrative. But did she know about the hero who was destined to appear? That remained uncertain, a dangerous unknown. Even though their relationship had grown strained, almost brittle with tension, Caroline knew that for the sake of everyone, she would have to find an opportunity to confront her, to pry out the truth hidden behind that gentle smile. Speaking of which, could it be that Ella herself intended to build a harem? It sounded absurd, yet the signs were impossible to ignore. She was already bound in marriage, and yet she continued to draw Lucien and the others closer, weaving them into her orbit effortlessly. Still, perhaps there was no need to worry. Lucien had long since been completely captivated by her, hopelessly enchanted. Even her name carried an uncanny resemblance to the heroine, Fujikura Ella. Caroline couldn't help but wonder what those characters might look like written in Chinese, what hidden meaning they might carry. But there was no time to indulge in such idle curiosity. She had far more pressing chaos to deal with. She had only wanted to retreat into the quiet sanctuary of the library, to steal a moment of peace, but fate seemed unwilling to grant her even that small mercy. A familiar voice shattered the silence, sharp and unmistakable, sending a chill down her spine. Caroline immediately sensed trouble. Sure enough, when she lifted her gaze, there they were again, the inseparable trio, appearing together as if bound by some invisible thread. Ella stood at the center, animated and lively, her voice echoing loudly among the towering shelves, while Lucien and Siegfried followed close behind. One wore a soft, indulgent smile as he explained things patiently, while the other seemed eager to display his talents, almost competing for attention. The entire scene felt like an extravagant display of vanity, a dazzling yet exhausting spectacle. Siegfried even boasted proudly that he had read every book on diplomacy, prompting Ella to respond with exaggerated admiration, praising him as if he were extraordinary beyond measure. Their laughter and chatter filled the room, making it impossible for Caroline to focus on her reading. And Lucien, especially him, he was already nothing more than a rejected loser in her story, so why insist on inserting himself into this suffocating picture? The entire scene spun before her eyes, dizzying and irritating. Fortunately, they hadn't noticed her tucked away in the corner. She had no desire to involve herself in their world again. Yet as she listened to the hushed conversation of two passing officials, a new layer of unease unfolded. Siegfried's situation, it seemed, was far less stable than it appeared on the surface. The two men, dressed in formal uniforms, spoke in low tones, remarking that although the crown prince had married the saint, he had lost the support of several powerful ministers. Whether he could truly secure his position on the throne remained uncertain. Reflecting on the past 2 years, Ella had undeniably become the favored darling of this world. Not only had she saved it in grand, heroic fashion, but she had also captivated 4 of the most outstanding men completely. Even her occasional rudeness or unconventional attire, skirt scandalously short by noble standards, was reinterpreted as charming individuality, something to be admired and imitated. Noble ladies even began to follow her trends. Such an unreasonable and overwhelming protagonist halo, could it truly last forever without cracking? Caroline had intended to remain hidden, silent, and unseen, but fate once again refused her that comfort. She was discovered. Yet instead of retreating, she stood her ground. What was there left to fear? The man before her recognized her instantly, and with that recognition came a flood of humiliating memories. In her past desperation to attract Lucien's attention, she had indeed committed countless foolish acts, even going so far as to dress provocatively to draw the gaze of other men. Lucien had remained unmoved, while she had instead attracted a swarm of unpleasant admirers. Since there was no escaping. Now she simply chose to feign ignorance, asking coldly who he was. But the man had no intention of letting her go so easily. He shamelessly brought up the letters he had once written, stepping closer with each word. A wave of dizziness washed over Caroline as she realized how many unresolved messes still lingered from her past. The man sneered, remarking with mock sympathy that having her fiancé stolen by the saint must have driven her mad. He laughed loudly with his companions, then, in an utterly shameless tone, suggested that since she was already abandoned, she might as well become his mistress. His hand even reached out, touching her hair without permission. Caroline's patience snapped. She shoved him away, her response nothing more than a cold, cutting sneer. Yet instead of retreating, he leaned in even closer, insisting that since her engagement would be broken anyway, he would gladly offer comfort to a fallen young lady like her. His disgusting expression made her stomach churn. This was the reputation the old Caroline had left behind, a pitiful, laughable toy in the eyes of others. Just as the situation threatened to escalate further, a familiar, icy voice cut through the tension like a blade. Lucien stepped forward, placing himself firmly between them, his gaze sharp and unforgiving as he questioned whether the man had never learned proper conduct, whether he truly did not understand the rules of silence in a library. The arrogant man from moments before immediately shrank, his confidence crumbling as he muttered an excuse and fled in embarrassment. Caroline couldn't help but mutter inwardly. Lucien, who had once been the loudest of them all, now lecturing others on decorum? It was almost laughable, like a thief crying, "Catch the thief." Though reluctant, she still offered a polite thank you. Strangely, Lucien did not leave afterward. Instead, he lingered, as if he had already seen through everything. He casually revealed that he had noticed her from the very beginning, even admitting that he knew her preferred seat. It had become a habit, he said, to glance there subconsciously. He had wanted to break off the engagement, yet this level of attention felt excessive, almost contradictory. Caroline casually inquired about the saint, and Lucien responded calmly, mentioning that she was dining with the prince, preparing to inherit royal heirlooms. Hearing one's fiancé describe another man with such ease created an unmistakable sense of irony. Then, as if nothing were amiss, Lucien turned his attention to the book in Caroline's hands, asking what she was studying so intently. Panic surged through her. There was no time to hide it. The page clearly detailed the weaknesses of magical beasts and even saints. Though she tried to explain it away, her heart pounded wildly. Before regaining memories of her past life, she had indeed once considered eliminating the saint. Quickly, she fabricated an excuse, claiming she was merely researching legends to see if there were other visitors from another world besides Ella. Lucien admitted he had never heard of such a thing, yet his next words carried an unsettling weight. He remarked that Caroline had always been prepared, sharper and more perceptive than most. He even suggested that if she discovered any new clues, she should inform him immediately. Internally conflicted, Caroline hesitated. She knew the hero would arrive in 3 months, but revealing everything now would be far too soon. As Lucien prepared to leave, she suddenly called out to him, her expression tinged with helplessness. She admitted that her father would never agree to break off the engagement so easily. Among high-ranking nobles, marriage was never a matter of personal choice. It was bound by complex interests and alliances. Worse still, her father believed Lucien's connection with the saint could bring greater benefits to their family. In contrast, Lucien had already persuaded his own family, leaving all the pressure on Caroline's shoulders. Yet she refused to yield. Instead, she declared with quiet determination that she had a plan. If she could find someone even better than Lucien, her father would surely agree. This clearly unsettled him, prompting him to ask whether such a person truly existed. Caroline offered no explanation, merely stating that she had already chosen someone before hurrying away, leaving Lucien alone with his thoughts, perhaps for the first time questioning whether he had been the one rejected. As she ran out of the library, the cool air felt like a release. She had come dangerously close to revealing too much. A soft sigh escaped her lips. Lucien could be considerate at times, but that very tenderness was a double-edged sword. Outwardly cold yet inwardly warm, he could never ignore someone in distress. It was likely that this very trait had drawn him to Ella in the first place, a simple act of sympathy that gradually twisted into something far more complicated, until he forgot the existence of his own fiancé. Looking at the way things had unfolded, Caroline had already made up her mind. Since this kind of misplaced gentleness only made his life more tangled and exhausting, then perhaps it was time for her to sever it completely, to reshape her destiny with ruthless clarity, and to ensure that when the long-awaited hero finally appeared, the stage would already belong to her and those she had chosen to save. Before she could even hide away, an invitation was delivered directly into her hands. The moment her eyes scanned its contents, her entire body stiffened. A dinner invitation from Saint Ella. And not just that, Ella had deliberately emphasized that she must bring her fiancé, Lucien. The maids surrounded her, their voices filled with admiration, praising her beauty without restraint. Yet Caroline only stared blankly at her reflection in the mirror. Does this outfit truly suit me? Will it seem too bold, too aggressive? After all, in everyone's eyes, she had once been a woman who lost herself completely over a man. The maids hurried to reassure her, shaking their heads earnestly, afraid she might spiral again. But the truth was undeniable. She was radiant now, brighter than she had ever been. In the past, in her desperate attempts to compete with Ella, she buried herself under heavy makeup, as if trying to carve her ambition directly onto her face. But this time, she had chosen differently. This soft, natural look only enhanced her beauty, giving her a quiet confidence that needed no declaration. There was still a faint hint of sharpness in her gaze, a villain's shadow lingering between her brows, but her elegance was undeniable, impossible to criticize. At last, Caroline smiled. A genuine, heartfelt smile. It felt like a breathtaking transformation. She was ready. Doris could hardly contain herself anymore. Before Caroline could even react, she spoke with emotion overflowing in her voice. Seeing that the lady has finally found herself again, it's better than anything. Memories of the past years resurfaced, those absurd, humiliating days. For Lucien, Caroline had attended countless banquets alone, sacrificing even the last fragments of her dignity. Every grievance, every silent tear, the maids had witnessed it all. But those days were gone. Now, Caroline understood everything clearly. From this moment on, she would live only for herself. She would wear what she loved, become who she wanted. Then Doris brought astonishing news. Lucien had personally come to pick her up. For the first time. Ever since Ella appeared, he had never spared Caroline a second glance. That woman always had an excuse. First it was something about a World of Warcraft, then a darkened crystal ball, endless schemes to steal away every man's attention. So why, this time, had Lucien come himself? Caroline suddenly dropped a bombshell. This would be the last time Lucien escorted her, because she intended to officially break off the engagement. The maids froze in shock. In the past, Lucien had always cast her aside for Ella, treating her as nothing more than a disposable shadow. But now, Caroline refused to endure that humiliation any longer. She gazed at her reflection, so refined, so vibrant. How could she have ever thought herself unworthy? For years, she had been suffocated by pressure, venting her pain through overeating until her figure deteriorated and her skin lost its glow. But after regaining memories of her past life, everything changed. She trained relentlessly, disciplined her body and mind. Now, her hair shimmered like silk, her figure restored to perfection. If Lucien could not cherish her, then she would carry this beauty forward herself, walking boldly into a new life, head held high. The maids were even more excited than she was, insisting she wear the most dazzling jewelry, determined to let all of high society see. Caroline was the center of attention now. The doors slowly opened. Lucien was already waiting by the carriage. Though impeccably dressed, he radiated an icy aura that pushed everyone away. Caroline knew all too well, he must be utterly unwilling. After all, tonight's host was Ella, the newly crowned crown princess, the woman Lucien loved deeply. And Ella had deliberately invited Caroline to bring her fiancé. Wasn't that practically a public execution? Yet Caroline remained composed, offering polite thanks for his escort. Lucien merely responded coldly, not even sparing her a proper glance. When she softly called his name, he didn't turn back, just uttered a curt remark and stepped into the carriage. The chill in his attitude was suffocating. Caroline couldn't help but sigh inwardly. This wasn't a dinner party. It was a battlefield. But it didn't matter. She had a mission tonight. As long as she could end this engagement cleanly, being ignored meant nothing. Still, once seated inside the carriage, the oppressive silence became unbearable. They sat facing each other, yet not a single word passed between them. Lucien stared out the window, expressionless, treating her as if she didn't exist. If he despised her this much, then she had to act quickly tonight. Watching his darkened face, Caroline suddenly realized he must be worried she would cause trouble again. So she spoke first, assuring him she would behave. She even offered him an escape. Once they greeted the crown prince, she would quietly disappear, leaving him free to spend the evening with Saint Ella dancing as he pleased. But instead of relief, Lucien grew even stranger. After a long silence, he asked abruptly, "Aren't you going to dance with that man tonight? The one you love so much?" Caroline was stunned. Where had that come from? She shook her head firmly, claiming that person wouldn't appear tonight. Lucien frowned, unconvinced. At an event like this, where elites gathered, how could that man be absent? Clearly unwilling to drop the topic, he pressed further. Cornered, Caroline could only fabricate a lie that the man was abroad. Only then did he reluctantly fall silent. Yet unease crept into her heart. If Lucien escorted her personally tonight, her family would surely misunderstand, believing their relationship had improved. That would make breaking off the engagement even harder. Before she could think of a solution, Lucien suddenly spoke again. "Why did you do all those foolish things?" Caroline blinked, caught off guard. Lucien began listing her past actions one by one, accusing her of seeking attention, of causing trouble for Ella, of dressing provocatively, as if she had branded herself with the word ridiculous. Each word felt like a blade. Though those actions belonged to the original Caroline, she now had to bear the shame. Listening to his cold judgment, a deep sadness welled within her. So this was how everyone saw her, a hopeless, obsessive woman. But the truth was so different. It had been Ella all along manipulating events, framing that poor girl. The injustice ignited something fierce inside her. Why should the victim be nailed to the pillar of shame? Lucien, oblivious, continued speaking, calling her name. And then, Caroline snapped. She reached out suddenly, gripping his tie, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You want to know why?" Her voice trembled, yet burned with emotion. "Isn't it obvious?" She nearly shouted. "Because I truly fell in love with you." The confession shattered the silence. It was raw, painful, unfiltered. She had torn away her last shred of dignity. How foolish had she been to love him like that? Even now, her words echoed with the remnants of that devotion. Lucien was stunned. For a fleeting moment, even his cold heart wavered. But it was too late. He had already been drawn away by Ella. While the world mocked Caroline, while even her parents pitied her, she had still chosen to believe. But this was never love. It was betrayal. Lucien, do you even understand what you've lost? Caroline admitted everything. Her past mistakes, her desperate attempts, her inappropriate actions, all of it stemmed from one simple, painful desire. To be seen. Back then, she had been so desperate, believing that if she tried hard enough, he might look at her once more. But that pitiful love was finally completely overturned. That once all-consuming, almost suffocating obsession now leaves behind only a faint, bitter aftertaste. At last, she can stand at a distance, like a detached observer, quietly bidding farewell to that naive first love. Lucien is still going on about those so-called accusations of harassment. But Caroline's words strike straight at the heart, sharp and undeniable. You never once thought to hear my explanation. Instead, you simply labeled me as overly emotional, as if that alone defined everything. Faced with this eerily calm, almost unrecognizable woman before him, Lucien hesitated. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Had he truly been so wrong all along? Caroline, however, had no intention of retreating. This time, she laid everything bare without hesitation. I don't love you anymore. And I don't need your forgiveness either. This engagement ends here. To Lucien, her tone felt unbearably cold, like she was discussing someone else's trivial affairs. But Caroline had no desire to preserve his pride. Why are you the only one pretending to be the victim? If anything, you're more like a tragic hero, trapped in your own self-righteous narrative. This kind of misplaced affection. I've seen more than enough of it. Lucien still clung to the memory of the innocent girl she once was, yet now she stood before him, bristling with sharp edges, untouchable. Just as the tension between them reached its peak, a sudden stir broke the silence outside. The carriage came to a halt. Without warning, Lucien adopted a commanding, almost domineering stance. Today, I will be your protector, and I won't accept any objections. If he had said those words before, Caroline might have been so overwhelmed with joy that she couldn't sleep for days. But now, they only sounded hollow, arriving far too late, cheaper than grass, meaningless and insincere. Still, she calmly placed her hand in his. Since we're acting, then let's finish this final performance properly. The moment they stepped into the venue, the sheer grandeur was overwhelming. Nearly every noble in the city had gathered. The palace was packed, buzzing with energy. The wedding had only been held a few days ago, yet such a lavish spectacle was staged again. This was no ordinary dinner. It felt more like a meticulously crafted trap. Those two actually showed up together? The whispers spread like wildfire across the ballroom. Everyone was eagerly waiting to see Caroline make a fool of herself again, placing bets on whether she would lose control for the saint tonight and cause another scandal. These cruel, cutting remarks. Caroline had heard them all before. In the past, she had desperately tried to prove her innocence, only to sink deeper into the web of malice. But now she finally understood. Such a meaningless game, she had no intention of playing it anymore. Just as the rumors reached their peak, Lucien suddenly leaned close to her ear. Before anyone could react, he swept his gaze across the crowd, his expression icy and terrifying, like he could devour those gossiping tongues whole. What exactly are you all whispering about? The sharp rebuke silenced the surrounding crowd instantly. No one had expected it. Lucien, who was always distant and indifferent, had actually defended this so-called abandoned woman in public. Feeling the firm weight of his hand on her shoulder, Caroline let out a quiet breath. Since someone was willing to stand as her shield, there was no reason for her to hold back anymore. Looking around at the pointing fingers, Caroline suddenly realized something. There weren't that many people gossiping after all. All this time, she had believed the entire world was laughing at her. But perhaps, She had only been frightening herself. It was time for this tedious farce to end. She was no longer someone who could be easily manipulated or crushed. If they wanted to play, then she would reclaim every ounce of dignity she had lost. Let's go, Lucien. She took the initiative, her voice steady and brimming with confidence. For a brief moment, Lucien hesitated, then followed her without question. At last, the star of the evening appeared. The moment Ella saw Lucien approaching, she moved forward eagerly, but just as she drew close, her foot slipped, and she fell straight into his arms. Like grasping at a lifeline, Lucien instinctively released Caroline and caught the fragile figure. "You're always so careless." His voice carried unmistakable affection and indulgence, as though the man who had defended Caroline moments ago was an entirely different person. Caroline stood to the side, watching coldly. Ella's performance was painfully obvious, yet Lucien fell for it every single time. In this so-called three-person play, she remained nothing more than an unnecessary extra. The old Caroline would have exploded at this scene, turning the entire ballroom upside down in a storm of jealousy. But now, she only wanted to distance herself from the chaos. Such a mess, whoever wants it can have it. Before she could slip away, Siegfried approached, his tone laced with impatience, blaming them for arriving late. Lucien could only apologize quietly, the earlier tension dissolving instantly. Watching the situation unfold, Caroline's eyes flickered with realization. Wasn't this the opportunity she had been waiting for? Glancing around, she saw that the ballroom was filled with influential figures rarely seen in public. Every target and their respective partners were present. But before her satisfaction could settle, the atmosphere shifted strangely. Her gaze fixed ahead as she subconsciously called out a name, Isabelle. At the center of attention, Isabelle appeared, shockingly underdressed. Not even a proper gown adorned her. Siegfried's expression darkened immediately as he questioned her sharply in front of everyone. Caroline's heart skipped a beat. This was no coincidence. To humiliate Isabelle in such a setting, someone was clearly orchestrating a trap behind the scenes. Ella's smile, subtle yet unmistakably wrong, confirmed her suspicions. Siegfried frowned. "Didn't you say you wouldn't attend tonight?" Isabelle froze, completely at a loss. She had only heard that the crown prince was unwell and rushed over in concern. The murmurs grew harsher by the second. Everyone assumed Isabelle had lost her composure, dressing like this out of desperation. The once proud young lady had become a laughingstock. Isabelle clutched her skirt tightly, unable to utter a single word. Even if she tried, she couldn't clear her name. Ella, with flawless precision, turned the situation against her, claiming that Isabelle's attire was a deliberate insult to the banquet. She even played the victim, lamenting how she had only wanted to build a good relationship, only to be humiliated in return. Siegfried was completely deceived. Disappointment filled his gaze. Isabelle, raised like royalty since childhood, had never faced such calculated cruelty. How could she possibly fight back? The whispers turned sharper. Was she truly fit to be crown princess? From the sidelines, Caroline saw everything clearly. This was a hunt, and Isabelle was the prey. Ella's move was ruthless beyond measure. Stealing a fiancé wasn't enough. She wanted to publicly destroy Isabelle, branding her as a madwoman forever. Just as Ella believed victory was within reach, Caroline stepped forward. With a gentle smile, she addressed Isabelle, her tone filled with admiration. She admitted she had once wanted to dress the same way, but feared she lacked the grace to carry it. The entire ballroom fell silent. Then Caroline continued, casually enlightening everyone. "Didn't you know? In the artistic capital of Useria, this natural, back-to-basic style is the height of fashion right now." In truth, she was bluffing. She recalled a game trailer from her past life. This trend wouldn't emerge for another 2 months. But to rescue Isabelle, she boldly fabricated the story, claiming she had received insider information from an artist. These nobles, ignorant of true art, were instantly captivated. Hearing it was the latest trend from the art capital, they began praising Isabelle instead, admiring her refined taste and forward-thinking elegance. Caroline's maneuver was flawless. Not only did it dissolve the crisis, but it turned Isabel into the center of admiration. Leaning close, she whispered softly, "Don't cry. The moment you show weakness, we lose everything." But Ella was no easy opponent. With a subtle shift, she twisted the narrative, arguing that pursuing nature didn't justify dressing so casually. Then she feigned innocence, as if she had spoken carelessly without intent. This tactic, advancing by retreating, was dangerously effective. The crowd quickly wavered, many siding with the saint, praising her wisdom. Caroline sneered inwardly. She hadn't intended to escalate things so soon. But if Ella insisted on pushing this to the end, then there was no reason to hold back. She walked straight toward Ella, smiling as she asked, had she forgotten their previous agreement? Even Siegfried looked confused. What agreement could they possibly have? Caroline turned to the crown prince, requesting permission to reveal it publicly. At that moment, Ella panicked. She hurriedly pretended ignorance, desperately trying to stop her. Even Caroline felt a flicker of doubt. She knew how insignificant she appeared. Who would believe her words? Just as hesitation crept in, Lucien stepped forward. Not only did he stand beside Caroline, but this time, unmistakably, he chose to support her. Caroline couldn't help but glance at Lucien secretly, her eyes carrying a faint, unreadable glimmer, as if trying to trace the outline of a man she once knew so well, yet now felt like a stranger wrapped in mist. With such a powerful figure presiding, Siegfried had no choice but to nod in agreement. A confident, almost dazzling smile spread across Caroline's face as she stepped forward, her presence instantly commanding attention. She cleverly brought up a crucial point in front of the entire Royal Academy, reopening old matters in the most public and dramatic way possible. Back then, the Crown Prince himself had admitted responsibility. He had asked others to take care of the newly arrived saint. But Caroline's words cut deeper. She exposed the truth that Ella only behaved like a saint in front of men, putting on a facade of gentleness. In reality, every private invitation from Isabel, whether for tea or gatherings, had been rejected. Why? Because Ella was too busy circling around those four men, treating everything else as insignificant. Caroline knew this better than anyone. There had never been any agreement between them. This was her gamble, a bold and dangerous one. Right before everyone's eyes, she crafted a narrative so convincing it felt real. She claimed Ella had personally asked her to point out any mistakes in the future, painting her as humble and virtuous. In one swift move, Caroline pushed Ella into the spotlight, no, into the fire itself. Ella froze, utterly stunned. She had never said such a thing. But Caroline didn't stop there. She understood Siegfried's nature, his love for praise, so she skillfully flattered him, her words smooth and irresistible. Now, if Ella dared to deny it, it would be equivalent to humiliating the crown prince in public. Caroline had seized the moment perfectly, drawing every gaze toward herself. This was her stage, her chance to strike back. And she was ready. She began by praising the crown prince and the aloof saint, commending their efforts in leading troops and defeating the monsters at the border. Her tone was filled with admiration, at least on the surface. But just as they were about to bask in that glory, she shifted the conversation sharply. Her voice turned serious, heavy with meaning, as she spoke of the displaced people. The border villages still lay in ruins, their people starving, struggling to survive. Locking eyes with Siegfried, she asked with sincerity that felt almost piercing, if they were truly the nation's hope, shouldn't they prioritize helping those victims? With the founding ceremony approaching, how would the suffering citizens feel knowing the royal family was indulging in extravagant banquets? Her words were like flames thrown into dry grass. In an instant, both Ella and Siegfried were placed under immense pressure. Caroline had cornered them beautifully, either continue enjoying their false prosperity or lose face before the entire city. Her performance was flawless, every sentence deliberate and sharp. She even invoked Isabel, portraying her as someone who silently supported the saint's decisions through actions. The fabricated agreement now sounded undeniably real. Repeating how kind and understanding the saint was, Caroline piled all the weight onto Ella's shoulders. Inside, Caroline sneered coldly. If Ella loved playing the saint, then she would have to swallow this bitter role, whether she wanted to or not. Caroline wanted to see how this perfect saint would escape such a dilemma. Ella panicked and grabbed Siegfried, desperately trying to explain that no such promise had ever been made. But before she could finish, another voice stepped in. Lumina spoke up, testifying that there had indeed been an agreement. Clarisse followed immediately, insisting she had witnessed it too. Ella tried again to defend herself, but Siegfried called her name, cutting her off. Everyone expected anger, confrontation, yet what followed shocked them all. Instead of fury, Siegfried looked deeply moved. In his eyes, this wasn't conflict, it was a display of deep friendship between the girls. He even expressed relief, claiming his previous worries were unnecessary. Publicly, he declared that once he inherited the throne, he would learn from these outstanding women, listening more to the advice of friends like Lucien. One by one, he thanked them: Caroline, Lumina, Clarisse, and finally, he mentioned Isabelle specifically. He promised that he and his future wife would remember this lesson. His words stunned the entire hall into silence. Isabelle quickly stepped forward, masking her emotions as she expressed loyalty, praising the crown prince's future rule. Siegfried, ever the master of charm, returned the favor by glorifying Isabelle as the most noble and beautiful of all. Caroline stood there, slightly overwhelmed. She had never witnessed such a situation before and could only respond with a polite smile, claiming she simply wished to help. Deep down, however, she knew the real support had come from Lumina and Clarisse. Later, she thanked them privately. Lumina, blunt as ever, admitted she had long disliked those people and was delighted to teach them a lesson. Clarisse, on the other hand, felt she hadn't done enough. Watching her, Caroline felt a strange warmth. This younger girl was far more reliable than she appeared. Seizing the moment, Caroline suggested they all become close allies from now on. To her surprise, everyone agreed enthusiastically. It suddenly struck her. Within the original storyline, these four had rarely even met. Someone had clearly been preventing their alliance. Now that they stood together, Caroline proposed forming a united front, sharing information to survive their difficult circumstances. Clarisse sighed softly, confessing that if things continued like this, her engagement would be cancelled next month. It felt like being pushed to the brink. Caroline smiled gently, comforting them all. Let the saint handle the liars. What mattered was that they looked toward a brighter future. They even made plans to visit her home for tea next time. These women, once trapped and toyed with by fate, were finally preparing to fight back. Caroline extended an invitation to Isabelle, expecting refusal. But Isabelle's response silenced them all. She admitted she had known everything. This visit was never simple, and that man had never truly cared for her. Yet, she still walked into the trap willingly, because only by witnessing that cruel truth could she force herself to let go completely. Caroline said nothing. She simply stepped forward and embraced Isabelle tightly, offering silent comfort. For the first time, Isabelle didn't have to maintain her dignified smile. Her long-suppressed pain erupted, leaving everyone deeply moved. It became clear, behind the strongest appearances lay the deepest scars. Even Clarisse, who cared so much about her image, couldn't hold back her tears. She confessed how suffocated she had been feeling. Lumina, startled, hurried to comfort her, but emotions spread quickly. One by one, they all let their guards down. Caroline looked at them, her heart unexpectedly at peace. In this cold, unforgiving world, she was no longer alone. These women, once destined for tragic endings, now stood together, holding on to each other. In that moment, their fears and anxieties melted away. As the dinner ended, Caroline sat in the carriage, gazing out at the quiet night. Her heart felt stronger than ever. What had been a trap set for her had turned into an opportunity, a powerful alliance. These girls were nothing like the cold characters from the original story. They were warm, real, and vibrant. It felt as though she had suddenly gained several sisters. A bold, almost ridiculous thought crossed her mind. What if they could all live together, alongside a perfect husband, free from schemes and intrigue?
Hi guys, thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it. So, I have decided to make a part 2 and upload it on Saturday, so click the subscribe button. And I am expecting 500 likes on this video until the part 2 comes, so please you guys give this video a lot of love.
The name of this manhwa is Goodbye My Cheating Fiancé, Pelu. I will find happiness in the second game po. Bye guys, see you all in the next part.